So when working on integration of sensory reflexes, so in this case we're going to demo a Palmar grasp integration and then also a Babinski integration. And we're going to focus on just right side, but you always want to complement the therapy with photobiomodulation in the weaker cerebellum and the weaker cortex, or the side you're working on at that time, if it's global or if it's bilateral. So I'm working on a Palmar grasp. This is what's essentially testing the integrity and the function of your corticospinal pathways. Cortex through the brainstem, crossing over through the spinal cord to inhibit those reflexes. So when you elicit a Palmar grasp, that is stimulating the spinal cord, and it's creating a flood of sensory information that creates motor output at different cord levels. The cortex is supposed to come in and inhibit those reflexes. So when kids have reflexive movement in a Palmar grasp, that tells you that their brain is not inhibiting that reflex. So things that we can do to promote activity in the brain stem and the cord are going to be incredibly beneficial in improving the activity so that brain then comes down and can inhibit that spinal cord reflex. So corticospinal pathways, or your pyramidal tracts, or corticospinal tract or pyramidal tracts. Cortex, brainstem, spinal cord to the extremity. So when I'm working on a Palmar grasp, you're going to see varying levels, and a lot of times you won't see like that textbook grasp. A lot of times what you'll see is when you stroke the finger, kids will gently abduct and adduct their fingers, or it might just be one finger that moves reflexively each time. So those, you could grade that however you'd like, but be aware that it might not be that textbook grasp sensation or that textbook grasp view or response. So when you're working on a Palmar grasp, what you want to do is provide as much sensory input to the cortex as you can. So a lot of times we'll use something called the Resimax, and the Resimax, Dr. Josh talks about it, one of our favorite tools. It vibrates at the same frequency of our vagal tone, so there's a very calming effect to it. Plus there's a lot of different ways that I can make contact with a joint or with some like dermatomes to elicit sensory responses. So simple way to do it is, if someone has a Palmar grasp, just work on providing vibration input to the palm. So you're essentially eliciting that reflex over and over. So providing info to the brain then can come down and inhibit the reflex. So very simple. You could also work on some wrist and hand range of motion with some vibration sense. So we talk a lot about range of motion being really important. So I'm adding a bit of proprioception through the wrist while having vibration on the skin surface. So this is a lot of input here, and the same principles apply. So slow, complex, and non-linear. So we're not just going back and forth. It's not herky-jerky. The more complex we can be and the more variety that we can impart in our movement here is going to be most developmental for our brain. So giving the brain more feedback allows the brain to do more with that feedback. Really powerful, and if it's within your scope, are gentle wrist adjustments, and I really like to adjust the lunate. So that lunate is really a big one for wrist flexion extension, and being able to provide input to the right cerebellum and left cortex really helps increase activity there, so then you can get reflex inhibition. But if it's within your scope, being able to adjust a lunate is a really powerful way to inhibit reflexes. Sometimes I'll work on kids' sensory reflexes for an hour or a day and make little progress, and then sometimes just one adjustment immediately allows them to inhibit that reflex. So if it's within your scope, being able to adjust the lunate or even mobilize through that lunate, so really you could do like slow, progressive, like increasing range of motion through lunate adjustments or through lunate mobility or mobilizations, or you can add like a high velocity, low amplitude adjustment to that. This floods same side cerebellum and opposite cortex. So to palpate the lunate, what you're going to do is come to essentially where the radius and the ulna terminate, and then you have 2 rows of 4 carpal bones, and then that lunate is on just to the medial side of that proximal row. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 carpal bones. That lunate's right there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a gentle skin slack and kind of slide up to that, so I'm making contact with my thumb, and then I'll kind of come thumb over, and I'm just going to come through that joint. And you can do some gentle mobilizations just to provide proprioception, or a quick high velocity, low amplitude adjustment or manipulation. That is a great way to inhibit reflexes by firing up the weak cerebellum. So you can simply provide a lot of sensory stimulation. You can do sensory stimulation with ranges of motion. You can do some joint mobilizations. You can do joint adjustments. Or if those aren't within your scope, you can just do some really gentle joint distractions and then working ranges of motion while distracting the joint. You can provide some joint compressions. So I'm providing some axial compression here through the elbow, through the wrist. And then when I'm doing that, what I want to do is keep my movements really small and really complex. Obviously, a bigger person can take a lot more force through their joints. So if you're working on a small child, sometimes less is more. But really, what you're looking for and your measures are what creates smoothness of movement, and then what allows you to inhibit that palmar reflex. So if I'm working on a palmar, I'll be probably checking every 30 seconds to a minute to see, like, hey, what kind of activity do we have? Worst case scenario, I'm providing excess stimulation when I'm checking that reflex. So if I'm trying to elicit that palmar, I'm just measuring the effectiveness of my approach. I'm measuring the grade of that reflex, and then also it allows me to know when and if I need to add input or if I need to change my input to get his brain to inhibit the reflex. So a lot of times you'll see just simple stimulation that goes a long ways, but if you're able to add more layers of compression and adjustments and mobilization and complement that therapy with photobiomodulation, you can get rid of a palmar within 10 minutes a lot of times. Especially a lot of these kids will work on these reflexes or have these reflexes for years, but they're not getting that variety. They're not getting the support through the photobiomodulation. Doing both simultaneously allows you to really fire up their brain, give their brain enough energy and activity so they inhibit the reflex. So I'm going to move on to the Babinski here. So if I'm working on a Babinski, same thing. I'm going to leave those lasers, especially this lateral cerebellum, because that's what's perceiving the leg. But I'm also going to move my laser right to the top, just parasagittal, just off of midline. So I'm always complementing the therapy with the lasers in the right spot.
Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. To learn more or to schedule an intensive or anything with my team, there's a link below. Just go ahead and click that, and that'll get you to the right spot. Have an awesome day.